the highlights of our forum, one of the keynote interventions at the New York Maritime Forum. Our forum has the double mission of, on one hand, discussing the latest developments in the global maritime markets, and on the other hand, to promote the profile of New York as a global maritime hub. New York and the maritime activities encompass a very large economy. Of course, in the center of it, we have the port. The port is one of the busiest in the US and one of the busiest in the world, with all global companies participating in the supply chain, trading through New York. And of course, you have capital raising, you have legal service, and a lot more. So we are delighted and honored to have with us Rick Cotton, who is the CEO of the New York and New Jersey Port Authority. The New York, New Jersey Port Authority has been with this conference every year, so I'd like to thank Rick for his support and also for his intervention. And without any more delay, I will turn it over to him to deliver us his presentation. They've done tremendous work in the infrastructure for New York, and we look forward to your remarks. And thank you.
Nicholas, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join, even if this event is a virtual one this year, obviously set in very extraordinary circumstances. What I'd like to do very briefly is set the discussion of the Port of New York and New Jersey in the context of the Port Authority's broad portfolio. So let me just do that very quickly. So this is actually our new logo. Airports, we have 5 airports, the 3 major airports, JFK, LaGuardia, Newark. We also run Teterboro and Stewart in upstate New York. Our land reference is to several facilities. We have 3 Hudson River crossings, a bridge and 2 tunnels. We have 3 bridges that run from Staten Island in New York to New Jersey. We have our bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan, and we have a bus station in just across the George Washington Bridge. And certainly, last but not least, we operate the 16-acre World Trade Center site, which has 3 new office towers, almost all of them virtually fully leased. We also obviously have the Memorial and Museum, and we have under construction a Performing Arts Center and St. Nicholas Church. Our rail asset is the PATH Commuter Railroad, and obviously we have the seaport. So that is our quite broad portfolio. Now turning to the next, we try to operate all of these according to a set of priorities and standards. Right at the center of our priorities, I won't read all of them, but we are highly focused on safety, on a major capital plan to move from subpar infrastructure. Our airports have been not close to what they should have been. Our bus terminal needs to be refurbished. We are committed to that. We put customer experience and operational excellence, sustainability at the top of our agenda, as well as being highly focused on our employees. And set out on the slide is also our standards in terms of how we do things: integrity, diversity, global best practice, 21st century technology, collaboration, and speed. Speed is something that government agencies are not usually good at, but we really try to have our focus on getting things done. So turning from the broad focus on the Port Authority, I want to focus on the Port of New York, our maritime facilities. I'm going to touch on three aspects which are on the screen. Let me move and recall the pre-COVID times. I know it feels like a decade or more ago, but it's been 7 months. But our 2019 was truly extraordinary at the Port of New York and New Jersey. It set a record. Every month was higher than the equivalent month in the year before. And if you look back on it on a 5-year time frame, we've had a 30% increase in terms of cargo coming into the port. Moving to the next slide. what has driven, or the result of that, is that in fact, in terms of the U.S., we become the second busiest container port in the U.S., surpassing Long Beach, California, which has been a neck and neck competition for over 2 decades. So what has driven that? 4 factors: dredging, raising the Bayonne Bridge, terminal upgrades, and expanded rail capacity. And let me touch briefly on each of them. Resulting in, by 2016, a 10 to 15 year both planning and implementation project working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers resulted in the deepening of our key navigational channels to 15 feet, 15 meters as an operating depth. We had a particular challenge in terms of what was an iconic in terms of architecture bridge, the Bayonne Bridge, which was 151-foot clearance, but way below what was needed for the coming generation in big ships. And in a 3 to 4 year sprint, the agency raised the roadway, preserved the arch, but raised the roadway to 215 feet. In addition, working with our terminal operators, they made significant investments, both already to date and planned, more than $10 billion in order to invest in larger ship-to-shore cranes and a whole variety of new terminal technology. In addition, the port engineered more than $1 billion of investment in 4 ship-to-rail freight transfer facilities, what we called our express rail facilities. Those completed in the last 1.5 years, and they now have a capacity for 1.5 million rail lifts per year. And those are designed, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute, for expanded and enhanced intermodal access to the Midwest, to New England, and to Eastern Canada. So the result of these investments really has opened the Port of New York and New Jersey to the big ship business, and we've had a big focus on that. And let me turn to some specifics. In parallel with our investments, of course, they have married up with what many of you are far more familiar with than I am, but is really a transformation in terms of big ships. New vessel technology, obviously the canal upgrades, both Panama and Suez, and the economies of scale which have driven the shipping business to the big ships. If we look specifically at the Port of New York and New Jersey, this has been a very important dynamic in terms of our capability, our cargo handling capabilities. In 2019, 76% of the big ships that are called on East Coast port made New York and New Jersey their first port of call. If you look at ultra-large container vessels coming into our port, there were 34 in 2016, 271 in 2019, and more than 300 we're expecting more than 300 by the end of 2020 in terms of this year. Another dynamic here, if you look at it as the percent of all vessel calls coming into the New York and New Jersey ports, 2016, 1.5% of the vessel calls were ultra-large vessels. And this year to date, 2020, we're at 14.6%, and we expect that percentage to go up as the year progresses. Now, if we look now in terms of the percentage of cargo, that obviously, as we've increased the percentage of vessels that are the ultra large ships, the percentage of cargo carried into the New York and New Jersey port on the ultra large vessels continues to grow, and we expect it to hit more than 50% in 3 to 5 years. And you can see that this year we're already at approximately 1/3 of our volume coming in on the ultra large vessels. Now, the key here from a competitive port point of view is that New York and New Jersey is the favored first port of call on the East Coast. And that is for the obvious reason that the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area is the largest single market on the East Coast. But as those ultra-large vessels make it their first port of call, they also improve our competitive position vis-a-vis cargo that is headed for the middle of the country. When the ultra-large calls on New York and New Jersey, it takes 2 or 3 days to unload or exchange its containers. By virtue of that fact, cargo shippers who bring their cargo into New York and New Jersey on an ultra-large vessel, it can be transferred to our intermodal capabilities in terms of the investments we've made in the express rail network. And the fact is that the container is on the railroad headed for the Midwest and potentially arriving at its destination before the ultra-large vessel even arrives at its second or third U.S. port of call. And that competitive dynamic we expect to continue into the future. We had the honor of receiving the largest ship to ever call on our port just a few weeks ago, the CMA CGM Brazil, 15,000 TEUs, and we expect the size of the ships and the volume that they bring into the port to increase on an annual basis. Now let me talk just for a moment in terms of the impact that COVID-19 has had both broadly on the Port Authority and specifically on the port. So all Port Authority facilities have remained open and operating throughout the COVID-19 crisis. We're very proud of that, a lot of effort. We've gone to great lengths to protect the health and safety of our employees during that period and to keep our facilities operating. Next slide. But here's the impact in terms of our activity volumes. You can see the airports and our commuter railroad at the depth of the crisis were 98 and 95% down in terms of volume. Bridges and tunnels were down 62%. The seaport was down 17%, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Now, the airports have only recovered, if you can call it that, to being 80% down, stunning decline. Our path railroad is still down 79%. Bridges and tunnels have recovered to a significant extent, but still 11% down. But here's the story with respect to the seaport, which is, while it was down 17%, by August, it was 1.3% above the prior August 2019, which itself was a record August. So we actually set a record at the seaport this past August. In terms of financial impact, these declines have had a stunning impact on the Port Authority. We're down this year alone, and obviously the year's not over, more than $1 billion in lost revenues. We project over a 24-month period we'll be down $3 billion. And the enormous challenge for us is that it dramatically reduces our capital capacity in terms of our capital construction plan. What you see in terms of the port itself is how resilient the port and the supply lines have remained. I've essentially summarized that, but you can see that they never dropped more than 16% on a year-over-year basis, and we've now recovered to where essentially we're at the same volumes we were pre-COVID, and this has been the result of a strong cooperative effort between the port itself, its terminal operators, and labor, all of which have worked hand in glove. So from our point of view, the port's resilience has positioned it to look forward and plan for future growth. And let me just say a few words about that. Here is the path forward. The Port Department just completed a 30-year master plan. It's a flexible roadmap which is intended to enable the port to accommodate cargo volumes, which we project will double in the next 30 years at a minimum. Our focus in terms of the master plan has been to engage stakeholders, be sure that we have taken account of all opportunities for growth. We're focused on a safe, resilient, and environmentally sustainable operation. What we have prioritized, obviously, is continuing to serve as an economic engine for the region. And from a self-interested point of view, we believe it will strengthen enormously the competitive position and the commercial value proposition of the Port of New York and New Jersey. The 30-year capital plan laid out two phases. Phase one with a 10 to 15-year time horizon, heavily focused on improving the infrastructure of the port itself, berths and wharfs, continuing to enhance our rail and intermodal capabilities, terminal densification, and again, with a huge focus on climate resiliency. In terms of phase two, it continues the focus on planning for future growth. That will require container terminal expansion, even additional rail and intermodal improvements, and again, continuing our focus on climate resiliency. So with that, I will come to my conclusion, which is the Port Authority overall and the Port Department in particular is committed to working with our port partners to ensure that the port continues to grow, continues to thrive, and continues to enjoy its premier and take advantage of its premier competitive position on the East Coast of the United States. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to lay out at a treetop level the Port Authority and the Port Department. And Nick, I will return the floor to you.
Rick, thank you very much for a very thorough and extremely interesting presentation, spot on. And congratulations for all the hard work you all have been doing. We have one question coming from Ken Huckster. He is an analyst from Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And Ken is asking, there's a trend now for having larger ships bigger than the 15,000 TEUs. So how do you see those bigger ships being able to be accommodated? Because you raised the bridge up to accommodate 15,000, I think. So does that put a limit in terms of the future growth of the port?
No, well, let me just be clear. The current height of the bridge will accommodate ships that are up to 21,000 TEUs. The 15,000 TEU ship was simply the largest ship that has called to date, and we expect to continue to see the growth of larger ships. And the judgment that was made at the time the bridge was raised was that being able to accommodate 21,000 and maybe a bit more size ship would continue to serve the port well. We may need to take a look at that, but we still have the ability to handle the growth of the coming generation of ships, as I say, up to 21,000 TEUs.
And Ken has one more question before we adjourn. He says, how do you take share from the West Coast, and where do you see the inventories in the system right now?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but in terms of what we're seeing, we're certainly seeing a bit of a shift at the moment, at least, with the volumes on the West Coast declining to some extent, and at least our volume continuing to increase. Again, that's pre-COVID, and we would expect our volumes to continue to increase. And we think that by virtue of the ultra-large dynamics that I laid out, that in terms of accessing the middle of the country, the Port of New York and New Jersey will continue to have a competitive advantage, certainly against other East Coast ports, and even vis-a-vis some of the West Coast ports.
I would think that Ken probably meant with the Panama Canal being bigger now, that may accommodate more traffic coming directly to New York, as opposed to going to the West Coast and being.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what we expect.
Terrific. Well, I think, let me see. Ken is thanking you for your replies. And I would like to thank you as well for being with us today and making an excellent presentation. And I hope we'll have the chance to have you again with us next year.
Thank you very much, Nick, and wish you a very successful event.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.